It's time to take a deep breath and quiet the mind. Every breath and thought was energy that brought us to our experience in this moment. We are going to exercise our beliefs in the possible. We will bend and create our own realities. Let's explore how to square our recovery and thrive in life. I welcome you to Recovery Squared Radio with your host, Steve Wofford.
Hello, I have Phaedra Koenig on the show with me today, and she is America's crisis coach. And Phaedra and I became friends a little while ago, and I was very intrigued with her story, and she's a great example of someone who is squaring their recovery from life events. And I wanted to bring her on the show so she can kind of explain her story and also talk a little bit about the work that she does in helping coach people through crisis situations. So Phaedra, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do, where you're at today, just a brief introduction, and then we can kind of get into your story a little bit.
Awesome. So what I do is I help people who are going through crisis. Basically, bold crisis management is a lot of what I do for individuals. I've actually worked with celebrities, professional athletes, and corporations. And where I am at in life right now, I am an empty nester. I'm enjoying that phase of life. I've got a daughter who's about to get married, so I'm super thrilled about that. And I'm just in this space of reinvention. My whole life is actually different than where it was 3 years ago. So I'm just in this really evolutionary space right now.
I love that. Isn't that a great way to live, where you're in this constant state of evolution?
Yeah, absolutely. And not pushing against it and seeing it as normal and not seeing it as setbacks or steps backs. It's just ever fluid and flowing.
That's so awesome. So what brought you to where you're at today? Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and your story and, what motivates you today?
Awesome. Well, my background is in the fields of psychology, mental health, family court services. So I work for about 23 years now, helping thousands of people who have been in all sorts of crisis at the social work level. I was a court investigator for a number of years. I had a housing program for 10 years where I served people with chronic mental illness and supported their families. So that's kind of where I came from. Now, how that translates to becoming America's crisis coach is I started working online probably 5 or 6 years ago, blogging before that was really even a thing. And I was actually pretty well known in the area of divorce. I had gone through a pretty brutal experience myself, and I was writing about it, like I said, blogging before it was really even a thing. And I was able to get some traction with that. So I developed a brand back then that was America's Divorce Coach, another brand that I own, and was very successful. I got a lot of play with Huffington Post. I wrote books. Just great things were happening. Well, along the way, I met and fell in love and got married, and actually went through what was or is the worst time of my life when my husband was accused by the state of a white-collar crime. And in that accusation, we were forced to defend him. And it was a very lengthy and dramatic process. So many things happened. Ultimately, to make a very long story short, he was convicted. And after that happened, things got really, really tough for me. I became collateral damage to the situation. And it really took me to a place that I had never been to before. Even though I had been working in crisis and dealing with people with setbacks, I ran out of tools for myself. And when that happened, I got fairly despondent and pretty desperate. And I didn't know anybody who had ever been through anything like that. And that in and of itself was paralytic for me. Because I didn't know anybody, that meant I didn't have a roadmap. I didn't have a mentor. I didn't have somebody to show me the way, or at least tell me it was going to be okay. Pretty much everybody in my world was saying, I don't know how you're going to get through this. I don't know how you're going to recover. And that really got into my psyche. And I got to the lowest point that I've ever been, a place I never want to be again. And I had to dig really, really deep to get out of it. I'm happy to say that I started to claw. I'm not completely out of it. My husband's been gone for 3.5 years. We're in the appeal process. It's rough. It's tough. It's the stuff you see on 2020, the stuff that you see on 10 p.m. television shows. But through that, I morphed and I expanded my niche from the area of divorce to the area of crisis, because once I was transparent about my situation, that's when celebrities, that's when people who were hiding in the shadows started reaching out, because they too wanted a mentor. They too wanted to talk to somebody who understood like nobody else could. And I started to see that the skills that I had after serving thousands of people really did apply. I just needed to ratchet it up. And I started to operate at a level that I never had before, solving problems that I'd never had to solve before. And in doing that, I redefined my business. I redefined myself. And I am just in a place now where I am helping people. As you said, we met through podcasting, my podcast, Coming Out of the Fire. I bring people on who have been through really crazy things that are not necessarily mainstream. And they're talking about it, and they're talking about it in a very practical way. So people listening, even though they might not have been through that specific situation, the range of human emotion is the same, and they resonate with one another. And people are starting to feel less afraid, less alone, more capable. And they're seeing from my guests and from our interaction on the podcast, it's not a crisis Kool-Aid. There's not a magic pill. There are very succinct things that people can do to start to pivot and turn the corner. So that's where I've been. That's where I am. And that's how you and I ended up connecting.
That's so awesome. What I find interesting about crises is that it's like you said, it all feels the same. Because I think sometimes when we go through these crises, it's, well, they're different than me. Mine's different, so I'm not going to tell anybody about it. And I really commend you for coming in and talking about this, especially the legal stuff. You know, I'm still, my divorce, I have my final hearing in a few weeks, but I was very scared to come out and say, hey, I had addiction problems. I did this, that, or the other thing. But at some point I had to know my truth and just go, hey, I'm speaking truth. I'm going to stand with that, and I'm going to quit hiding. Because when we really need to put that stuff out there, that's when we need to do it, because otherwise there's always a fear that we're not going to really step out of that. And I really don't think you can lose the stigma of that until you throw it out to the world. People need it.
I love that you said stop hiding. I'm writing a book called Everybody's Hiding Something because I am telling you, after really being honest about my story, and it started with putting a video on my website, after being honest about it, the hate mail reduced, the fear and anxiety that I walked around with when I would meet new people and wonder at what point are they going to say, oh, are you married? Or when I engaged with business partners, at what point was I responsible for telling them about this white elephant that follows me everywhere I go? Once I was willing to stop hiding it, it did open up possibilities that I, in my super smart head, had shut myself up to, thinking, oh, everybody's judgmental. Nobody can relate. Well, guess what? As soon as you show your messy side, people feel more empowered to share theirs, and you connect on a humanity level. It doesn't matter that yours was addiction and that mine is the situation I'm in. I resonate with you through a sense of grace and a sense of humility and a sense of willingness to meet you where you are. And the light in me recognizes the light in you, so to speak, because we are in a shared space.
Namaste.
Amen.
Yeah. In me taking my story out, I remember my coach literally had to walk me through it. She's like, Steve, there's not going to be car crashes. The stoplights aren't going to stop working. The electricity is going to stay on. But for whatever reason, I was so terrified to do it. And after I started talking about it and I became vulnerable with people, I've had one person, and I won't say who it is, that has said something negative about it. Mm-hmm. But I would expect that from them. And so I haven't had anyone say anything negative. I've only heard people say, you know, I inspired them in some way. And so that's how you create connection, is through being vulnerable. So I think that's such an important skill. And it also teaches you that, you know, when you're vulnerable, you create that deep connection, like you said. But also, when you have people that may not be good for you, that judge or whatever, those are the people that you probably aren't supposed to be in your life anyways. And so it's a very powerful tool in connecting and who's supposed to be in your life.
Yeah, and helping you feel okay with who you are, where you are. And I say the term, some will, some won't, so what? Someone's waiting. And when I was locked up in my own house, petrified to go anywhere because I hadn't been on the national news, but my husband had. And with the world of Google, it doesn't take long to connect dots. I lived with that voice, and that voice for some could be Satan. That voice for some could be negative energy. That voice could be your monkey mind. It could be whatever. It all is the same. And it's, you're not worthy. People won't understand. People won't care. This is the end. The best days are behind you. You screwed up. You're a victim. I mean, however. And I was there. I was there with every bit of skills that I had. And yeah, I know we're going to talk about, well, so what do you do? And it wasn't anything magical, just like I know for you. It was just small decisions. I call it making the best of the available choices. Sometimes all the choices suck, but one is going to suck less than the others. And that's what you walk towards. And I agree. I get rejection. I get hate mail. And I've been very transparent. Thank God for Facebook Live. I have been more open about that than I ever was. And I got a hate letter a couple months ago, and I got right on Facebook Live. And because I talked about it, it took all the energy out of that letter. Where before I'd get a letter and it would just earworm and just stick with. And it's not that I'm seeking attention and going on and saying, oh, poor me, I got this letter. It's like, no, this has no effect on me. And I'm sure for you, if someone reacts to you in a negative way, you now have a community base, and even us, we're peers. I would imagine if something hit you in the wrong way and you thought, oh, I could talk to Phaedra, you just pick up the phone and call me. So by building that community for yourself, you're actually creating a way to cope, not only with what you face, but whatever you may face in the future.
Yeah, that's very important. My last podcast where I interviewed Jay Brown, we were talking about that, how you heal through connection. We need those moments to create that connection to bring more healing. We heal in one as ourselves, but we also heal as one in unity with each other. And so that's very important. And it's interesting because today I look at negative things or things we perceive as negative that I automatically today I shift. I go, if I hear something or I perceive something negative, I don't look and go, let it bother me and going, hey, and judging them, hey, they shouldn't do that. That's wrong. I have to step into my truth and go, what is it about myself that I don't believe? Because when you fully stand in your truth, someone could throw or say anything at you and it just doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. Right. But if you don't know your truth and really who you are, you end up, the monkey mind, the inner critic, Satan, devil, limiting beliefs and all those things. It's almost you're more resilient towards them.
Yeah, you're impervious in a sense. I mean, if we look at, I was just having this conversation before our talk today. There are issues of my life that somebody else might really struggle with that absolutely don't even affect me at all. I was sexually molested from the time I was 3 years old until I was 13. And I was having a conversation with someone who was reaching out to me saying, I had a similar experience, and because of it, I have all this anxiety and I have all these problems that come up and da-da-da-da. And I had this epiphany that I never have those issues tied to that. Never. I don't have sexual dysfunction. I'm not afraid of men. I don't have any heebie-jeebies, like nothing. I'm completely impervious to it. And yet, if you want to talk about an element that might have to do with my current walk, or for me, maybe finances, oh my gosh, I can get all jacked up. So yes, there are areas where we are just literally impervious, but we can use the same things that have kept us impervious to those issues to the things that really do get us. And the key, in my opinion, is that self-awareness and getting in connection and working it, right? Having conversations or understanding how to shift your mindset. And when you were talking about having your previous guest, Jay, on, one of the things that I recognize as podcasters that I think is the reason to get into podcasting is that we now have that 6 degrees of bacon. If I want to talk to Jay and I thought he was amazing, I can just ask you to connect me to him because you now know me, like, and trust me. I know, like, and trust you. And it opens up a door to meet someone like Jay who has this whole other way of thinking. And because of that exponential energy of these people coming together. That can happen through being a podcaster. That can happen through networking, but it all happens through our transparency because we recognize it in one another.
Yeah, it's very powerful. That's all co-creating to me. And that's what we're doing exactly right now. And it almost has one of the things I said say often is the rhymes and rhythm and recovery are all the same. When it was recovering from drugs and alcohol are some of the same things I used to help recover from the divorce and the legal proceedings. And it's all the same thing. And connection is one of those things. And so whenever we're connecting with people like me and Jay create something and then you saw something in that, and it has that exponential ability to really have a compounding effect on what we're able to create because we can't create in isolation. And so it's a very powerful tool. And like you, that's why I love podcasting because it's like a co-creating medium, right?
Yes, and
it's a platform.
Podcasters are the most collaborative group of people I've ever experienced in my entire life. And I had been at Podcast Movement just a month ago and had the benefit of being one of their PMX speakers. And that group is just all about each other's success. There's no us and them. And that is that co-creation. And I think that I hope and I want to believe that we're going to be seeing more and more of that in the world than we ever have. And I think startups are even somewhat of that because I do believe they co-collaborate and things like that. And you're kind of getting my mind thinking and I'm excited about that. And you hit it right on about the exponential, that it's just boom and it spins off. And maybe what Jay and I connect over is going to be just a degree over what you two connected over, but boy, what will that resonate with on my tribe listening versus your tribe listening and so on and so forth.
That's very powerful. Yes, the podcast world is a little bit different in that, I network with all sorts of people, but the podcast is something, because really the reason I started this podcast is because, we've had those magical conversations before where you get off the phone, you're just like, wow, that was powerful. I was getting chills. And there's that energy of exchange that I don't find in other mediums. Blogging, I haven't connected as well. I feel like I like writing and all that, but to me, it's a little bit more isolating and it doesn't resonate quite as well. And it's hard to have that conversation. You can do it with readers, and I appreciate the medium, but the reason I wanted to have a podcast is because I had a history of having these conversations over and over, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to share this. Like, how cool would that be if I just had that cool conversation I just had and, gave it to the world? And that's why I chose podcasting, but I didn't really even understand the world that it would open up.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing that I've found about podcasting is it's a new medium. Even though it's been around for a really long time, it is fairly brand new and there is no real gatekeeping. So if you as a podcast host want to connect with somebody, there's the sense of propriety like, oh, well, they're so famous. How dare you try to connect with them? There are people who try to make you jump through hoops, but it doesn't matter because the numbers are in your favor. There are enough of us out there who are still either new enough or naive enough or whatever you want to attached to that we are willing. It's like if someone reaches out to you on Facebook and says, hey, do you got 15 minutes? Oh, heck yeah. And for all you know, they could be, a national best-selling author or untouchable in some realms. But for you, it was just, hey, I'd like to talk. So I love that about podcasting.
Yeah, that does happen quite a bit where the world opens up in a lot of ways, but what's interesting about podcasting is that you can get so niche down that you don't have to use the general purpose media that is kind of like you can go to your specialty boutique store in the world of podcasting versus going to a Walmart of the major media outlets. And so what I love about podcasts, you can get so specific. And not only that, you can search Google to find out a specific show that might be covered a specific topic you're looking for. And so it's a very powerful and transformational way to access information in empowering conversations.
Absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the different tools that you use in either your own crisis or that you've used to coach people walking through their crisis. What are some of the things, like say someone comes to you or even coming through this, like something really bad happens and you perceive it as a crisis. What do you tell people? What do you tell yourself?
how I help myself is a little bit different than how I work with people because I was a little bit farther along. I had a pretty big tool chest. So for me, what ended up being the game changer was getting into community. I had cut myself off. I was so recognized, even as America's divorce coach, but just amongst my peers as a person who had her act together, who could solve problems and was highly effective and efficient. And inside, I was at rock bottom. And I didn't know how to allow myself to be broken and vulnerable with other people. And my ego also told me, well, what are they going to tell me that I don't already know? So all hope is lost. So for me, it was about getting into community and willing to be just open and honest and talk to somebody. And again, that somebody had to be, I don't want to use the word worthy, but someone appropriate, right? It couldn't just be somebody. It had to be somebody with intellect and wisdom and a walk that could meet me where I was.
One of the problems I see when I'm working with people or back when I go take because I wore many masks on myself. I had a professional career. I had 3 kids, a dog, a nice house, and all that. But my wife was sleeping around on me and had a drug problem. Mm-hmm. So it could not be worse, and I could not be more broken, even though I had all the appearances. And so we get stuck in this, like, I'm not broken, I'm fine. Mm-hmm. For people that might be there, how did you step out there being the successful coach? And then, it's like I'm helping people do this, but I have my own issues. So how did you step out of that?
For me, I had to tell somebody that I was truly, honestly struggling and be unattached to whether or not they could solve the problem. The focus was just to tell somebody. But it can't be your child. It can't be somebody who's ill-equipped, right? Because then you're just putting burden on them. So I had to be strategic. So maybe it's a clergy member. Maybe it's a counselor. For me, it was a group of women who were 6-figure and above entrepreneurs. And for me, those were the people for me to go to. It was a retreat that I went to. I picked it very specifically to be vulnerable and talk about my story. And because those women had whatever it took for them to be those women, they really were able to meet me and help me. So that was what worked for Phaedra. Now, if you were coming to me with your issue, here's how I would tackle that. One thing that I know for sure is that people try to keep their professional and their personal lives apart. And when you integrate them is when you have that success. So what you're talking about, being successful, having kids, doing all that. I mean, you're a gorgeous guy, you had everything going for you, but you're struggling, right? Your wife's infidelity and then you and the drugs. Okay. I would want to talk to you about that integration. Now, the way that I would do that is I start with a very rudimentary and simple thing. And it is the grief and loss cycle. And it is old school. Most people think it has to do with death and dying, but it actually has to do with any setback that we face in life. And the grief and loss cycle, I'll just give you quickly, it's 5 stages. It's shock and disbelief, bargaining, anger, depression, and acceptance. Now, what I would do if you came to me, I would actually have you just talk until you were done talking and said everything you had to say. And then I'd talk to you about the grief and loss cycle. And I'd ask you, where do you think you are on it? Most people think that depression, which is oftentimes where they finally come and reach out, is when they're in depression. They think that's like the beginning. And when I show them that that's actually the 4th of 5th steps, all of a sudden they start to sit a little taller and they're like, oh my gosh, okay, wait, what? And you start to see some hope come in. So helping them identify where they're on with that. And then also knowing that oftentimes when we face critical crisis, a lot of people go to counseling, and that's super important, super valuable. A lot of people get deep into their faith. But we also need to take practical action steps. And if we're not in our right mind, we aren't our best problem-solving advocates. So having a coach, someone like me, someone like you, who can actually say, okay, these are the practical things that need to happen, because technically a counselor is not going to do that with you. A clergy member is probably not equipped to do that with you. So having an ability to actually solve some problems, again, empowers, right? You start to feel like, oh, I'm taking steps towards something. So the integration of the two, identifying problems, taking some action, knowing about the grief and loss cycle and where you are on it, that's where I launch people from.
That's awesome. One thing that you said that really resonated with me was having the personal life and the professional life. Because really, we only are one truth. You can't be the truth of your profession and the truth of your personal life. And I probably had like 5 of them. But what I realized when I go back and how I did that, it wasn't like you said, talking to somebody. You have to go talk and be vulnerable to the people that you fear that you'll judge you. You can't go because what I realized that I could go talk about my drug and alcohol use in the rooms of recovery, but it wasn't until I told my professional friends, I went online, did I really lose that stigma of all those things. So I think that's important for people to understand. When we start to talk about it, we can start by telling people that where we feel safe. But for me, I didn't have my true transformation until I told people that I feared what they would think of me.
Well, here's what I love about you, Steve, and I believe this about myself too, but I'm really seeing this in you. When Steve comes and talks about his struggle, and he does it with the people he's the most vulnerable with, or he creates a podcast and he's just open and honest about it, you become an ambassador of what's possible. Because through your humility, through your willingness to just show it all, but also as willing as you are to be the guy who was addicted, you are so passionate about overcoming or changing your mindset or doing things in a different way, walking a different walk. And because of that, you become an ambassador. And by actually speaking it and someone can see you and like, oh my gosh, this is a great looking guy. He has done something with this. If he can do it, I can do it. And you become an ambassador. And I've learned that for myself. I didn't expect that. When you were talking about the separation of the two, here's what that looked like for me. I was known as America's divorce coach. So anybody who wanted to work with me, wanted to promote me, wanted to have me in partnership with them, they wanted to talk about divorce issues. So it wasn't a natural fit for me to say, hey, I've got this big issue in my life. There was almost a reason to keep it secret, but I knew enough in my core that it was a huge big deal. And maybe someone could get offended if they perceived that I was being shady by not sharing it, right? So what happened for me is I started declining opportunities. I stopped seeking partnership. I stopped asking to be on shows to drive people into my funnel or, into my coaching practice because I was ashamed. I didn't know how to walk in the both worlds. And when I widened my niche and just went into crisis in general, my story became part of the package. And then I became that ambassador. And I didn't see that coming. I think I was actually white knuckling with my eyes shut, gritting my teeth, preparing for impact. But it hasn't been like that. It's kind of like I've been in the car and I'm bouncing off a few things, but I'm still moving forward, right? So there's not been this halting crash. It's been working and I'm bumped and I'm bruised, but overall I'm an ambassador for people who've been through really high-end crisis, whether it's shameful or whether it's you got victimized, it doesn't matter. We're still all working towards the same outcome. And I just really see that in you as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And you too. And I think, this is a situation where like attracts like, right? And we're able to co-create something out of it. And really, we can experience that compounding effect because we get to share both of our experiences. And I mean, just doing that kind of helps fuel and put energy into taking what was a crisis, and we're able to now kind of like carry the message. I originally learned that in 12-step recovery. That, to keep what you have to give it away. And so this is my way to do that on a large scale, and the same thing for you. So I love the work you're doing. It's very inspiring. And why don't you give our listeners your website if they want to find out more about you?
Yeah, the coolest way to really get the information, like I was talking about earlier about the grief and loss cycle, I only share this when I'm on podcasts, is to go to crisiscrusher.com. And it's going to give you a series of videos, some downloads, some worksheets. It's going to talk to you about the grief and loss cycle. It's going to take it and expand it a bit more. It's also going to talk to you about the hero's journey. And I'm sure, Steve, you know about that. Anybody who's read anything epic or watched these great movies, that's the hero's journey. And I'm going to help you show yourself that you're actually on a hero's journey. So crisiscrusher.com is the best way to get to that. If you would like to see my video and learn more about me, super simple. Just go to doinglifewithphaedra.com and you'll be able to see my video, my podcast, lots of things that you can see and do there as well.
That's awesome. I'll make sure to include all that into the show notes. And Phaedra, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. You're very inspiring and lovely, and thank you for the work you do.
Thank you for having me. It's been great.
You can access the show notes at recoverysquared.com/18, and I'll put links to Phaedra's site and also her crisis resource kit. And we all suffer from different crises in our lives. And if there's one thing I want you to walk away from, is that there are people to help you handle those. And oftentimes when you have the right mentorship, you're able to shift some of those crises in using those things to take your life to the next level. Whether you align with me or Phaedra, it's not important. But what's important is that you find people that are ready to support you. If you have any questions you'd like to ask me, you can email me at steve@recoverysquared.com. Or if you have any other questions or just want to connect with me, please feel free to email me. And I also want to send you the Recovery Squared Belief Guide into Living Your Infinite Potential. So when you go to recoverysquared.com and click on the Get Access button, enter in your email, and I'll email you the guide right over. I love you, and thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to Recovery Squared Radio. Please visit recoverysquared.com for access to resources on squaring your recovery. And as a reminder, act without doing. Create space between your thoughts and actions.